Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. Robert along with Sports Radio 610 Shaun Bijani as usual. And if you're new to the show, we welcome you aboard. 45 years in journalism between the two of us, over 35 covering sports in the Houston area. And Shaun, it looks like Billy Wagner, the former Astro great, is poised to get into Cooperstown next year. And after this year's vote, he was so close. We think that's what's going to happen. Before I get to that, just a quick reminder to subscribe and comment on YouTube. It's the best way to support the show. And if you want to listen on the run, find us on your favorite podcast app. But Shaun, before I get your thoughts on Wagner, let's take a minute to listen back to what I said about this a year and a half ago when Wagner was inducted into the Astros Hall of Fame. My longtime co-host Stephen Kerr and I had thoughts on the Astros bullpen ace and his Hall of Fame candidacy. Can somebody please explain to me why Billy Wagner is not in the Hall of Fame and why this is not a bigger thing or a bigger controversy? Because they threw up the stats and it's thrown right into your face when you see it in the stats. Most career saves all time. He's sixth with 422. Of those six guys, Trevor Hoffman, Lee Smith, Mariano Rivera, Francisco Rodriguez, John Franco, he has the best opponent batting average, 187. 187. His ERA, 2.31. It's the second best of those six guys. And it just seems like nobody's noticed it. Like, not even in Houston, sometimes you feel like it's gotten enough attention that he's not more into Hall of Fame consideration.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Robert. And I know we sound like a bunch of, a couple of homers because we're Astros fans. But honestly, all you have to do is look at the numbers and you see that he's right up there. I don't know, closers, it's funny. I mean, they voted all those other guys in you just talked about. And Billy Wagner, it's certainly not because he didn't have a good personality with the writers. That can always influence how the votes go. I mean, can you imagine Billy Wagner getting up there when he's inducted into the Hall of Fame? Can you imagine what his Hall of Fame speech would be like? Man, I just love to hear the guy talk, honestly. I love to watch him pitch, but I love to hear him talk because he's got some things to say. He's got that good old country boy persona that you just love. Yeah, honestly, it's got to happen sooner rather than later, doesn't it?
It's not like he's not exciting. The guy's a flamethrower. He's not Jamie Moyer when he's
right.
throwing junk. So yeah, it's baffling, but it was great this weekend to see the day that he gets into the Astros Hall of Fame. His son Will hits his first minor league, what you would say professional home run that game. And Billy Wagner was on his iPad a lot, according to the guys that were calling the games over the weekend, keeping up with everything that his son was doing. So that was cool.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
So there you go, Shaun. I just can't believe that Billy Wagner can't get any traction. And he also played with a New York team, the New York Mets. And Shaun, I was listening, or actually I was reading what John Heyman had to say. And he said, well, I didn't vote for Wagner because of his bulk stats. That was one of the quotes. And I thought, bulk stats? I thought saves is a pretty good bulk stat if you're a reliever. I mean, that's what he's done. He's sixth all time. This is not a guy that's just like, oh, well, he's got 30 saves, but his ERA and his, whip and his this and his that's good. No, he's sixth all time. And as I pointed out in there, the ERA is incredible with those other guys.
The numbers are really inarguable. And, trying to figure out why he's not in yet, why he only garnered, what was it, 51% of the vote this go around. I mean, I don't know. There's so many various different reasons. I'd take Scott Rowland into account 5 years ago, whenever he first received double-digit votes, it was 10%. And what did he go in the other day with? Like 78% of the vote or something like that. And it was a steady, incline of voting support that he'd garnered just over really a 5-year span. And I think it probably happened a little bit quickly for a lot of people that were surprised and even angry that he'd gotten in. But when you look at Wagner's ascension, he started with 10% of the vote, I think, his first year of eligibility, if it was 2016 or 2017, something like that. And to get up to 51.1% of the vote this go around this week, I think is pretty impressive. I think it lends pretty good hope for him.
It was 51% the year before, 68% this
okay,
time
yeah,
around.
60. Yeah, good call. I was hung up on the 51. So 68. I mean, that's a 17, almost 17% increase. And generally speaking, I mean, we can go back and look at it, but I think if you do, like in the last, let's just say 10 years, guys that have been right there teetering, that have kind of hung around, they usually see that market increase within the 3 years prior of them getting inducted. And so I think there's some really good examples to point to there just in the last decade. Wagner might be one in the future. Now Jeff Kent is another one who is, if you look at his total body of work.
He fell off the ballot altogether.
Yeah.
And he's pissed about it. He said, quote, baseball is losing a couple of generations of great players that were the best in their era because a couple of non-voting stat folks keep comparing those players to players already voted in from generations past and are influencing the votes. It's unfair to the best players in their own era and those already voted in, unquote. Kent's a 5-time All-Star, Sean, 4-time Silver Slugger, 290 hitter, nearly 2,500 hits, and has the most home runs by a second baseman ever.
And I think that's what really matters is when you look at, some of the greatest second basemen ever and all encompassing. That's how I kind of looked at Scott Rowland. He was one of the bigger third basemen that you ever seen play. The speed element, the power element. Jeff Kent brought a lot of those similar attributes in terms of what he'd meant to the position. And if we're talking the Hall of Fame, the best of the best, it's not the greatest home run hitters. It's not the guys that drove in the most runs. It's not just the guys that had the most hits. It's, hey, let's take the glove into account as well. Scott Rowland's case, he had the 4th most gold gloves all time for a third baseman. Jeff Kent, 5 gold gloves for a second baseman. The glove was there. The offense was there. On base percentage career wise, up around 380, 390, I believe, for his career. The batting average is there. The hits, 2,500. You go up and down the line. Statistically, it's there, Robert. The point that I made the other day, and I want to know what you think about this. And maybe Kent hit on it a little bit as well, the non-voting folks. As voters have kind of changed drastically over the course of the last, let's just call it 30 years. But even in the last few, since, baseball has kind of weeded people out. If you haven't covered these, if you haven't covered the sport in X amount of years, like bye, and they're going to try to take guys that are seeing the game now and that had seen the game then. I wonder, as much as we've seen voters change, like statistics have a lot to do with that and how they view the production of players.
Well, here's the other thing about statistics.
Mhm.
Jeff Kent put up great statistics in an era where everybody was cheating. Jeff Kent is not on that list of cheaters, according to what anybody's found out or anything close to suspicion. And the thing about Jeff Kent is he's considered not a great guy. He wasn't a good guy with the media. We know that always plays a role in this. What baffles me is Billy Wagner was great with the media. He's a fun player. He's a guy that everybody, I think, enjoyed being around, talking to. Great quote, everything that you would want. And like I said, it wasn't like he didn't play in New York for a long time. He did. He played with the Mets for quite a few years. It seems like it wasn't that long because we remember him so much with the Astros and he spent so much time here. But, the time with the Mets was a good amount of time for those people up there to get to know the Billy Wagner that we knew. And John Heyman also said he didn't have enough big moments. And I'm like, when does that matter in baseball? In the NBA, you hear it sometimes. But in baseball, are we getting rid of Ernie Banks and Ted Williams from the Hall of Fame? I mean, what's that about?
Yeah, and I think, it's maybe a little bit of all the above. I mean, they're voters. They're, unpredictable. They're just humans. And we all look at things. I mean, just look at podcasting and sports talk radio. How many times do we all agree on one thing. There's just different ways to look at it, and we place different values on certain things. And there's no real formula. It used to be back in the day, you had benchmark numbers. And if you didn't reach the benchmark of 500 homers, of a certain amount of RBIs, if you didn't have 3,000 hits or a 300 career average, you weren't a surefire Hall of Famer. There had to be discussion had. But I think the fact that he's a closer, and we've seen kind of baseball open its doors a little bit more here recently to more specialized roles as the game has evolved. But we do still have older voters with a different mentality, I think. And until that comes full circle and completely changes, and it's all just continuously evolving, there's not really going to be, I think, this unanimous agreement that, hey, regardless of how the game has changed and there's specific positions and specialized roles, we're not going to view them that way. The point that I wanted to make in regards to, statistics and how it's affected voters is that all these advanced metrics that we talk about nowadays didn't exist. I mean, they weren't conversation points. They weren't, pelts on the wall for guys that played 15 years ago, even closer to a decade ago. But you take those into account now, and you apply WAR and all of these things to these players that have kind of been there, done that in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And they look a little bit better than you maybe thought they were then. And that changes the minds of a lot of voters, and which I think is why you see the ascension of these players in the percentage of votes that they're getting every year.
Well, Shaun, I feel like we're going to see Billy Wagner get in a year from now.
I do too.
And I think you're going to have to go up there to Cooperstown and be our correspondent when this thing happens. Are you ready?
I would love it, man. I did it for Jeff Bagwell a handful of years ago. And absolutely, if another former Astro is graced with the honor of getting into Cooperstown, I'm definitely going to do everything in my power to make that happen. That turned out to be, I went on my own. I just wanted to see it. I was mad that I didn't get to see Craig Biggio the year prior to that. And so I went up there for Biggio, and it was fantastic for Bagwell. And it was fantastic. An experience unlike any other. And I'd been there as a kid, as a 15-year-old. And to go up there as, a 30-something, was just as special, probably more so because I'd forgotten a lot of what I'd seen. And I can't wait to do that. If Wagner gets in, awesome. If Kent gets in, awesome. And I think both of those guys will. Now, Kent's going to be a little bit different because he has to wait now for the contemporary committee to put him in since he'd fallen off the ballot. How many more years, by the way, does Wagner have before he falls off the ballot? If he doesn't get in, let's say next year, which shouldn't be a difficult thing. He has to get 7% more of the vote.
I don't think I checked on that, but one thing that's real interesting about Billy Wagner is, he was with the Astros from 1995 to 2003. So it's about 9 years or so, which is about the same as Nolan Ryan. But outside of Nolan and Billy Wagner, I don't know if there's anybody, I can't think of anybody, can you, in the Hall of Fame, that spent more time as an Astro outside of course, Bagwell and Biggio?
That spent more time. I'm sorry.
That spent more years with the Astros than Bagwell or Biggio. That's in the Hall of Fame.
That's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I think Billy Wagner's right there with Nolan Ryan. Nolan spent the entire 80s, so I want to say it's 10 years, and then Billy Wagner spent 9 years, I want to say, with the Astros. And there's nobody. I mean, I can't think of anybody that's in the Hall of Fame that spent as much time as those two guys, outside of obviously, we know Biggio and Bagwell, who spent, well over a decade with the Astros. Anyway, that just an interesting thought.
That is a good point. I mean, the fact that we're struggling with it, I mean, I don't think that there is. People forget about Nolan in the 80s, at the Astros, like not people from here, but, people on the outside. They forget about that. By the way, I think Billy's got 2 more years. He retired in 2010. Kent was 2008. So just judging by the end of their careers and their start of their Hall of Fame eligibilities, Billy's got 2 more years. I don't think he'll need it. He needs 7% more. Wasn't it Bert Blyleven a few years ago before he'd actually gotten in? The voters really messed with him bad. Like he'd missed it by like just a few percentage points. 1 year and had to wait till the next year to get that one vote, and probably Dan Shaughnessy or something holding the whole thing up. But I really think Billy's probably going to make that jump 68 to beyond 75 next year.
It was 9 years for Nolan, so he didn't last till 89. I thought he'd last the whole decade. So it's the same as Billy Wagner. So those two would be tied for third, I think,
Yeah,
as far as
cool.
Astros tenure in the Hall of Fame. Let's go to the Texans because the latest Texan coaching odds I found real interesting, according to Vegas. You and I doing this on a Thursday afternoon, and Jonathan Gannon still the favorite, plus 175, but it's gone down a little bit. 36.4% chance he's the guy. D'Amico is a rock solid number 2 right now at plus 200, not too far behind Gannon at 33%. So the momentum is there. And Mike Kafka is plus 500, a guy that you say has got a lot of buzz to him, 16.7%. Ichiro Evero is plus 600, and Shane Steichen is plus 650.
Yeah, and I think Steichen being, near the bottom of that list in terms of the odds probably has more to do with opportunity elsewhere in terms of being a better fit, I guess. I think you can make a really strong argument. I don't know if we're talking enough about Shane Steichen because he checks a lot of the boxes that not just fans want, but that you should want if you're in the position that the Houston Texans are right now. He's one of the few, not named Sean Payton, the only one actually that's been an offensive coordinator for more than one season. He's wrapping up, I believe, year 3 with the Philadelphia Eagles right now. And he's an offensive guy. When you have a number 2 pick, who knows if the Texans stay there, if they try to trade up, if they stay put, trade down, whatever, you're going to get a quarterback that you hope you can develop into the franchise quarterback of this organization. And what better guy that is not, again, named Sean Payton would you like to kind of turn the keys over to the car with and have him develop them and make them in to just that, the franchise guy. Look at the job that he's done with Jalen Hurts, obviously. But Mike Kafka is a guy I feel like, man, is really gaining traction. He is buzzing. People are talking about him. People are looking a lot more closely at him, and we're finding more things out in terms of specifically the tree that he came from. We know it's Andy Reid. We know it's Kansas City. We know Eric Bieniemy and Patrick Mahomes, all of these things. But what did he do? I mean, we're finding out now and hearing some things in terms of how Andy Reid decided to handle this Patrick Mahomes experiment that was, just a handful of years ago whenever they drafted him. And Reid said, hey, Kafka, he was the quarterback coach, first year. Here you go. He's yours, man. Let's see what you can do with him. And that speaks loud and clear to the kind of faith that a head coach like Andy Reid, who's been there, done that, and been so successful, has in a guy like Mike Kafka, who was a 5-year NFL vet and maybe, played in a couple of handfuls of games over the course of his career as a backup quarterback. And here you go. You're going to turn the keys over to this guy and make a franchise quarterback out of Patrick Mahomes. I don't know.
Well, the other part about this, and something that, you're talking about, we talk about these as in terms of it's one guy, but let's keep this in mind. If you bring in Mike Kafka, he's got to know who's going to be his defensive coordinator, or Casario's got to have a guy set up for him. If you bring in Jonathan Gannon, who's going to be his offensive coordinator? Because those are critical things, and how the staff plays out, whether it's D'Amico or Kafka or whoever, it's always a package deal that you're trying to get done with these guys. So like don't always think of, oh, well, it's this guy and let's focus on what he does and how good he is and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I personally believe that, and I feel like I'm sounding like some bad Miss Universe contestant right now. I personally believe, but what I think on head coaches is you get the guy that you feel like is going to be the best leader of men. And, I know about D'Amico. I know about Gannon a little bit. I don't know a whole lot about Kafka, and he hasn't been around in these type of leadership positions maybe as much as those other two guys, although Gannon's only been a DC for a couple of years. But that to me is like a big deal with this. Although I think when GMs look at it, they look at it as, like I said, the package deal. Yeah,
no, you're right. I mean, you have to. I mean, that's one of the first few questions I have to imagine, when you go in for an interview. Hey, who are you thinking for coordinators? Let's see. Your tree here says that you've worked with this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. What's your relationship like with them? What do you think about their scheme, how they handle a locker room, players, practices, the whole thing? What other things did they help the organization do when you worked with them? And they're trying to piece the puzzle together. I mean, if those aren't questions, those would certainly be my questions, because every time I'm, going to block out an hour to 3-4 hours, 6 hours in the case of Sean Payton for some teams, talking to him, if I'm going to block that amount of time out, those are all things that I want covered. I want to create the best possible blueprint that I can if you're the guy. Okay. You have to have that conversation. And then, okay, we can worry about the whole sales pitch later. If the money's going to be right, the years are going to be right. Here's what we're thinking. We're going to make you turn Davis Mills into something, or Davis, we're probably going to make him a backup, and we're taking a quarterback this draft. And, what do you think about that? All of those things are discussed. I thought it was interesting, and I thought about it the same way you did, Robert, as you laid that out right now. I think it was a Gyro Evero. Boy, I hope he's not the guy, because that's a tough name for me to remember.
Exactly.
Double
Same
E.
here.
I'm going to call him Double E wherever he goes. Doesn't matter. But Double E, I think he'd gotten a job interview, maybe one or two elsewhere, as an offensive coordinator. I'm sorry, not Evero, but Thomas Brown. He got a job interview as an offensive coordinator. And so I thought about it like, okay, well, he interviewed for the Texans as a head coach, and he's never been a coordinator at the NFL level, did it for 3 years at the University of Miami from 16 to 18. But I wonder if the Texans liked elements of Thomas Brown, and maybe if there is some sort of past relationship where paths have crossed between maybe D'Amico or Thomas Brown. They know each other or whatever. If it's D'Amico and he maybe brings a Thomas Brown in, who interviewed for head coach, but also interviewed for offensive coordinator for another organization or two, and they like his ideas, maybe you bring him in and he can fill out a staff. Something like that in terms of a package deal, not where you had previous relationships before, but maybe because you liked a couple of candidates that you interviewed for different roles on in this organization. I think that's maybe a possibility. I don't know how often that happens. Probably not much, but it is something to think about as, we continue to roll forward. And look, the three biggest guys, in my opinion, D'Amico, Steichen, and Gannon, you can't talk to them until beyond January 30th. You still have 4 or 5 more days before you get to that point. So you have to explore all options, all opportunities, and try to create, mock blueprints and see which one you like best.
One quick thing outside of the Texans coaching decision, the quarterback decision, because we always come back to that in the draft. And here's the thing that's bugging me. Will Levis keeps being brought up for the Texans. And I'm like, what? I'm sorry. No, thank you.
Look, Mel Kiper said it the other day.
Yeah. Look at Will Levis's. Can we look at his numbers for just 1 second? He had 19 touchdowns and 10 interceptions this year. 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions for his career, which is basically the last 2 years. 46 touchdowns and 25 interceptions. CJ Stroud, in one season this year, 41 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Last year, he had 44 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Like, it's not even close. And I've watched Will Levis as a quarterback because he's in the SEC, and my team that I follow, the Missouri Tigers, are in the SEC. And I saw him go up against the Tigers this year. He didn't look good. I've seen him other times. He's scattershot. He's all over the map. Sean, I don't understand what anybody is excited about. Yeah, he looks good. He looks good in a uniform. Guess what? I go back to the old Joel Bushbaum quote, the Mel Kiper before Mel Kiper, the original Mel Kiper, who used to say, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane.
I remember that. I've heard that over the years. Yeah. Well, you heard what Kiper said the other day in regards to Levis, right? And for people that maybe not familiar with his analysis of Will Levis, Kiper, to all of your points on the contrary, said, well, Levis was banged up. He, didn't have a good offensive line. He didn't have his weapons. The receivers that he'd had to throw to, the route concepts were poor. And yeah, you're going to throw more interceptions when you're trying to force balls. I mean, had an excuse for everything. And Kiper flat out said, when asked, who is the best quarterback prospect in this draft today, in your mock draft 8.4 or whatever it is by now for Mel Kiper, He said Will Levis. We'll see if he changes his tune in another month or 2 or 3, before the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if he does, but that's just the contrary. But how much, do you take into account collegiate statistics? I mean, we know you got to take a little bit of that with a grain of salt. Depends on the offense, depends on the talent around you, depends on the conference you're playing.
Look,
And
there's
like
always
that.
situational issues, but you don't come into the NFL and everything's perfect, and you don't get into perfect situations. And the Texans aren't perfect, and he's going to have to deal with a lot of issues here. And not saying, you've got to get better at all those things, and you will, but come on. I mean, it's not perfect.
No, it's not perfect. And, look, Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, all of these other mock drafts, and analysts that we hear from that are going to talk guys up and down, over the course of the, NFL offseason for 3-4 months is leading up to the draft. That is, it's crazy, and it's maddening because I'm not a talent evaluator, to the degree that they are. I'm not talking to scouts. I'm not talking to front office people. I'm not talking to athletic directors or coaches or anybody like that. I'm just kind of looking at it and trusting my eyes like, thousands of you out there are doing the same thing. I mean, this is what we do, Robert. And, my eyes tell me that right now, if you told me from Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker, Richardson. What's Richardson's first name from Florida? I can't remember. Anthony Richardson. Those guys, those are like the top guys, right? Which one right now today, gun to my head, am I saying to you is going to be a franchise? There's only going to be one franchise quarterback out of those. That's what I'm telling you right now in this hypothetical. Who's it going to be? I'm going Bryce Young. That's it. I'm going Bryce Young. Gun to my head, in 4 or 5 months, years, am I dead or alive? We'll have to wait and see. Could Will Levis turn into like some Dan Jones success story? I don't know. Maybe. But to say that the guy just flat out can't play, no, he's obviously got some skills. But can he come in today right now and lead an NFL franchise? I don't think so. Can Richardson do that? I don't think so. Can Hendon Hooker do that? I don't think so. I even have my doubts about CJ Stroud. But I'm confident in one guy, and that's Bryce Young, that I think could come in right now and lead an NFL franchise.
I saw something that he's somewhere around 180 something pounds. Somebody said, I don't know if they're like secretly getting to his scale or whatever. I don't know how they're figuring this out. Like it feels like a guessing game because he's not listed as that, but I know they're talking about him desperately trying to get to 200 pounds by the time the combine or whatever rolls around when they start measuring him. But it's funny to me. It seems like he might be the only person in the country in January after New Year's Eve that his big thing is trying to gain weight instead of trying to lose weight.
Yeah. Like the whole game with the weight. I mean, my God, so what if he gets up to 200? Is it a good 200? Is it playing 200? He's going to get 200 for a day or two, to do these weigh-ins at a pro day or a combine. And then he gets drafted. And guess what? The guy, he plays at 192. That's the best we can do. And he's added, X percentage of muscle on his frame. Okay, so what? Like, I'm not falling into that trap. I know the odds, are stacked against you. And you just look at some prime examples, Kyler Murray, Tua, some of these smaller quarterbacks, that have been banged up, slung around like rag dolls, have soft tissue issues, or concussion issues, whatever the case may be. Look, size does matter to a degree. But look, if you got one of the better offensive lines in front of you, and if you're building around this guy legitimately, then I don't know. Look, maybe we need to stop looking at these types of quarterbacks as franchise guys in terms of like who's going to be the dude for the next decade plus. Maybe we need to start looking at them with a little bit more of a timeline on them, like we do running backs. You know what? If you can get 6 years out of a guy, awesome. Yeah, you're going to end up paying the guy once his rookie contract expires, but what's it worth to you? And you just kind of cycle through them, to some degree like that. And I think it's obviously not all quarterbacks, but I mean, these smaller type guys that are, dual threat, heavy skilled guys like that. Maybe that's how you need to look at them. I don't know.
Well, a guy like Lamar Jackson. Okay. I'm going to throw him out there. Lamar Jackson, like a lot of the quarterbacks now, they're going to run some. So the life is going to get shortened up a little bit if you are going to run some. I mean, Russell Wilson's done that, but he's able to get down and stay out of traffic and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, I think that's definitely a thing. And I don't know if it was ever a issue in the NFL where you were like, okay, I'm going to try to get 10 years out of any position out there, much less quarterback. So yeah, I agree with you there. I just don't see a need to like worry about his longevity, but a lot of people will say, well, I'm not worried about his longevity. I'm worried about his shortgevity and how long he's going to last this coming season if he's 180
I know, but
pounds or something.
the years go by fast, So I mean, even if it is a Bryce Young and he's a slow starter, slow adapting to the NFL, and that first year is just the first year. It's his rookie year. You chalk it up to that. Well, then you're in year 2. And you've got that 5th year option because he's a first round pick. And so you've got year 2, 3, and 4 before you have to make the decision to exercise that 5th year and maybe thinking about paying a guy. Well, look how fast the Arizona Cardinals paid, Kyler Murray, and then maybe how much they're regretting doing so right now today because of that decision, give them all that money. The market is only going to go up until you tell me that it's not. And it would have to be something just catastrophic for it to just pause or just stop or start a decline. But it's just the years start going by. So he has a good year 2 and a really good year 3. Maybe he's an all pro and a pro bowler and he gets the team to the first AFC championship game. And it's like, hey man, we got to pay this guy right now because the market's only going up. And that's a decision that you have to make as a franchise. But maybe you sign him up to a 7-year deal worth, $250 million and 180 of that's guaranteed at that point in time. And then what? Reality hits. Your offensive line takes a beating. You can go through all the scenarios and it's just, man, this guy doesn't look as good. Well, his offensive line's bad and you had to get rid of a receiver or 2 and you had to go through different changes at running back. And well, the defense stinks now. And we went through another head coaching change, whatever the case may be. And you're saddled with all this guaranteed money that you're paying a quarterback and you're thinking like, man, is this guy our future? I guess I just want those problems at this point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Give me something like that. Just a reminder, if you need a Rockets fix, check out our show with our Rockets expert, our regular Frank with Rockets Chop Shop. That went up on Wednesday. And by the way, Sean, we had a lot of praise for Sengun Wednesday night, 21 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks. The only 20-year-old who put up a line with at least those numbers in all those categories across the board at a younger age is some guy named Magic Johnson. And I just want to close the show out, Sean, by saying this about Sengun. All I heard about, at least from the Rockets, is, well, he's not good enough defensively. Well, he hasn't looked too bad defensively recently. He's not perfect, but he's 20 years old. And guess what? Everybody else on this roster stinks defensively, practically, except maybe a Jayshawn Tate or a Jabari Smith. Number 2, I don't want to hear that he can't go longer than 26 minutes a night when you're throwing him out there right now for 35 plus minutes a night. And he doesn't look tired at the end of the night. He still looks like he can do some things out there. A lot of this stuff that the Rockets threw in his way is just flat out wrong. And we're seeing how wrong it is right now. They might take the credit and say, well, he wasn't ready till now. And I think that's kind of crap because all of a sudden he's getting all these minutes when they need him to get these minutes because Kevin Porter's not out there. And they're realizing we need somebody out there that could actually score and get the offense going, which is what Sengun has done. And I guess my final thing with him, Sean, is if you're a Rockets fan, there's a lot of bad stuff this year. But this guy has been a light. He has been a beam of hope and somebody that they, frankly, stole with a couple of first-round picks that they traded over to Oklahoma City. Somebody threw up on Twitter that, oh, well, that thank you, Oklahoma City, but they owed us about 20 favors after that Westbrook Chris Paul trade, and we're never going to get that back.
No, that's going to be a black eye on the organization. It doesn't go away. It's going to be a memory always, a bad one, but always it'll be there. I think the best point you made about Sengun is the amount of minutes that he's playing and his effectiveness. 27 to 35 minutes in this Rocket system can be a little bit differently in another system. Minutes are not equivalent. It's what you're being asked to do while you're on the floor and the onus that is placed on you on either side of the ball, offensively or defensively. And I think with the better group, and and just maybe some different pieces in a rotation is a little bit different, and a better coach with a better scheme. I think 27 to 36 minutes looks a little bit different. I think we can all agree to that. And I just know this, Sengun, you're right. He's been a light, but I mean, I'd felt like we should be talking a lot more about this guy for a lot longer period of time than we have. Like, I didn't need to see all of this year to know that he was going to be a special player. I'm glad I'm seeing it. Validation's good. I just wish it would rub off on some other guys and, they would play with the consistency, the heart, the effort that this guy brings to the table every night. I love it. This guy is somebody you can absolutely add some pieces to, build around, and it should give you hope, in the future for the Rockets team. And, I just hope that Jabari Smith and Jalen Green particularly, and if it's KPJ, like they just start to feed off of this and just some epiphany hits, somebody punches them in the face and wakes them up a little bit. And you know what? Rafael Stone and Steven Silas to boot. Somebody just give them a mean elbow right to the chops and let them wake up, man, because something's got to change here. And ultimately, I told you this the other day, phone conversation. I think at season's end, something will change in that front office. I just have to believe that because it is go time. It's go time. You're not tanking anymore. You get this one out of your system and you get the very best player that you possibly can in this draft lottery and you move on. But when I mean move on, you got to get yourself a new GM. You got to get yourself a new staff and go with this great young talented roster that is full of skill, man, because they really are. You just ain't seen it yet. Houston doesn't know what it has right now because you didn't have the coach or the front office to really supply that foundation.
No, Rockets fans know. Maybe Houston doesn't. I don't know. Houston, if you're a Rockets fan, if you care about them and you watch the team, I can guarantee
all the hardos do. All Rockets Twitter and the hardos, like, your red rowdies, they know. But the city wants to be behind its basketball team. And the vibe in this city is just that this organization is absolutely in disarray, similarly to the Texans.
But the difference, and I want to make this clear if I haven't before, the difference between the Texans and the Rockets and where these two franchises are is the Rockets actually have talent that looks like can win with if you get in the right people, whereas the Texans need to go get that talent. There's a few guys, but the Rockets have some talent at key areas, and the last thing I want to point out about Sengun, and I'm likely to get more into this with Frank as we get closer to the draft, but this is key. Sengun, you talked a lot about Sengun. I want to talk about one thing specifically: professionalism. That is what he does. You talk about consistency. That's being a professional. He was a professional before he came to the Rockets. And there is a difference between Jayshawn Tate and Sengun, who understand how to be a professional because they came from professional leagues. And then you drop down to the college guys. And Jabari and Tari Eason are bringing it, maybe not to that level, maybe not to that consistency, but they were in organized teams where you have to win at a college level. Mm-hmm. And then you go down to somebody like Jalen Green or Daisha Nix that had none of that. They were in the G League, playing for the G League and not Ignite, which, you might have been getting paid, but it wasn't, you're in an organized team, professional deal. And there is a difference, if you notice, between how those guys bring it. And so keep that in mind when a Victor Wembanyama comes in. If like I said, very likely he's not a Rocket. But if he is, he's been in a professional environment for the last couple of years, like Sengun. So I think he's going to bring some of that. I think he's going to bring some of that. I want to win. I'm just not here to put up my numbers that we've seen from some of the Rockets out on the court way too often. So that's something to consider as you evaluate these different guys.
It's a great point. It's inarguable. And I think that is in large part helping create this divide that exists within this team, is the differing levels of experience and the expectation. It's hard, when you're a young player coming from a high school program or just a year in a college basketball team, and you go to this professional team and you're tanking. They don't care if you win or not. And it's exactly what, John Wald said on the podcast a week ago. That to me is my biggest concern. My biggest fear is that you're instilling that thought process, those bad habits, and those expectations in young players that don't know how to deal with that upon coming into a league. Nor should they. You don't get that experience in college. You don't get that experience anywhere else. It's the pros. It's business. And you're met with that harsh reality right away. A good mixture of NBA veterans, guys that understand the business, but guys that also know how to know what it takes to be a professional because they've been there, done that before. That's what this roster needs.
It's Bills and Chiefs on Sunday, and 49ers. Your D'Amico Ryans led 49ers playing against the Eagles, against Gannon and Steichen. If you're a Texans fan, you got something to watch for on Sunday. Hopefully, we're going to have a coach's decision sometime in the not too distant future. But like Sean said, it could be a while. Sean, we're going to do this on Monday. We'll be talking about those games and other stuff, but looking forward to it.
Maybe a hot take here. The next head coach for your Houston Texans will be coaching in some capacity in the Super Bowl.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.